Welcome back, everybody, to the Land Between the Meadows, the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and with me again is Mr. Daniel Hopkins, and we are talking about Garrard County history. But before we get into that, you can connect to us at KY History Pod on Twitter or Facebook, or you can email us at landbetweenthemeadows@gmail.com. And that's where I'm going to stop. And Mr. Hopkins, how you doing?
I'm good, Jameson. How are you?
Good. Ready to learn. I'm ready to be educated about Garrard County, one of the, I don't know what, top 5 counties in the state, maybe top 10 if you.
Top five is low. I think it's top one.
Top one. Okay.
It's first, and then Lincoln and Rockcastle are just way behind it.
Oh,
so that's the most important thing. No, I'm happy to be with you. We talked on a previous episode about you had done some Lincoln County research and podcast. Of course, that's where you live and where you work, and you did Rockcastle County, which is where your whole family's from. And I was able to help you out with some of that. A lot of my family is from Lincoln County. I have spent my whole life in Garrard County, and my father spent most of his life in Garrard County as well. And I went to school at Garrard County, and I teach at Garrard County. So hopefully I can guide us through a little bit of this. Say what?
You have a little bit of credibility.
Yeah, well, hold that until we get done here. That may all change. So kind of what I wanted to do is just to start with, I want to throw out just kind of a real quick hitter about sort of where Garrard County is. And then, so we'll start and then we'll work backwards in time if that works. I know that's, Garrard County was founded in, it's a little bit conflicting, and I think it has to do with like governmental, when things actually get signed. It was founded in December of 1796. It was officially made a county in January of 1797. And you know more about this, but sort of the process of making a county, it had to be voted on by the representatives and all of that.
Yeah.
So it was the 25th county formed in the state. It was formed out of 3 surrounding counties: Lincoln, Mercer, and Madison. Lincoln, obviously, one of the original 3. Mercer and Madison then were
the original. 7. Yeah, they were. It was. Lincoln, Jefferson, Fayette, then Nelson, and then Mercer, right. Madison, and
Bourbon.
Those were the next 3. So
and Garrard was actually the state. It becomes a state in 1792, and then there's kind of a real quick, pretty steady stream of counties being added. And 1796 was really no different. There were 5, I think, different counties that were formed in that year. And they were, I'll break them down into this just real quick. First of all, Christian and Warren County, which we think of today in far western Kentucky. Not far western Kentucky, but in western Kentucky. Christian County, which is Hopkinsville, Warren, which is Bowling Green. Those were cut out of Logan County. So if you think about Logan County sort of stretching almost from like modern day Russell Springs all the way out to, say, Land Between the Lakes. They just sort of split Logan into 3 parts, and Logan stayed in the middle. To the east was Warren, and to the west was Christian. So what does that mean for most people? Doesn't really matter, but for this podcast, all of that was Lincoln County. And so you can kind of see that, like, that gives you an idea of how big Lincoln County was, because like Lincoln was split almost in half, Lincoln and Logan, and then Logan gets split into thirds, and they were still 3 like massive counties out there. But of course, that's all just people moving out there. There was enough people to warrant something like that. 3 other counties that were created that year: Bracken up in northern Kentucky, Bullitt County, which is just south of Louisville, and then Montgomery County just east of Lexington. Garrard, Bracken, Bullitt, and Montgomery were all sort of similar in that they were not near as big as the counties that had been created before them. They were more smaller, but appealed to sort of a population that needed that. And Garrard really, if you could almost think about like 3 points coming together, Mercer, Lincoln, and Madison all smashing together, Garrard was sort of laid right there.
Right in the middle.
Right there on it.
Yeah.
Garrard County named after James Garrard, who was the governor, second governor of Kentucky. He was the governor at the time when it was formed. Now, he was from Virginia. He lived in Paris. There is no evidence that he ever actually was in Garrard County. I made a little note on my stuff that if you go in First Southern National Bank on the square in Lancaster, you can see him and his wife's picture. That might be as close as they ever got. But,
I mean, surely he came to Stanford at some point. Surely,
he probably did. But he, that was if you look back at those first 10, 12, 15 governors, they almost all got a county.
They did, yeah. And I mean, it pretty much as they went, and as they became governor, they got a county named after them. So.
Yeah, it was. They probably got that in lieu of payment, I'd say.
yeah. And an interesting fact: Madison was the first governor that did not get a county named after him,
which was probably just unfortunate because Madison County already existed.
Well, Madison County already existed, and crazy. Madison County was named after his first cousin.
Right?
Yeah.
Name's Madison.
Yeah. So anyway, back to Garrard.
So, well, just to give, if you're listening and you're kind of unfamiliar with Garrard County, a couple of different things. First of all, it's spelled Garrard.
Garrard.
It could be Garrard. A lot of times people know that it's pronounced Garrard, so they leave that last R out of there. As someone who has coached and played in numerous ball games in Garrard County on my jersey, I've seen a lot of signs from cheerleaders and that kind of stuff with it spelled wrong. So, but it's Garrard is how you would pronounce it.
And if you mispronounce it, it is instant fight mode for anybody from Garrard. They are ready to fight.
Well, it's funny that you say that because the county did we might have to find a way to link this into the podcast. The county did like a little tourism thing. It's probably been 10 years ago now. It was like a 1-minute commercial, and it was called "It's Garrard County," and like it starts with like the mayor and the mayor is talking to somebody, and he's like he keeps saying all these wrong ways to pronounce it. And she's like, "It's Garrard," and then it's Garrard, and so finally he's like, "Oh, I get it." And so then they went around and like the judge executive, the cheerleaders, the elementary kids, like everybody's pronouncing it, and it's like it's Garrard County, and we'd love for you to join us or something like that. It's a cute commercial. Yeah. Actually, one of my students made when I had him, he was who made that video for the county, which is pretty cool. But so Garrard County sits in what would seem to be an advantageous spot. If you think about central Kentucky being sort of Lexington, Stanford, Richmond, and Danville, Garrard County is where sort of the nexus point of those 4 places. In many ways, that's been good. Today, in some ways, that's been negative because those places all sort of outpaced Garrard County. And Garrard County, even today, sort of serves as a bedroom community, and it has for a long time. But that kind of gives you an idea if you're thinking about where this is. And Garrard County's dates are a little bit later than like Stanford, Boonesboro, Harrisburg. And part of that is, when we broke down, when you on your Lincoln County podcast and then on the Rockcastle County podcast, we talked about people sort of trickling into the area and facing all kinds of difficulties. Now, I don't want to make light of anything for Garrard County. But a lot of the people that settled in Garrard County had already been to Fort Logan. So, I know on a podcast, actually the one I was listening to today, you all talked about how 1777 was like the worst year for Native American attacks. And after that, you don't want to say that things got better, but they weren't fixed, but they got a lot better.
That aspect was fine.
Yeah, and a lot of the settlements in Garrard County started in what would become Garrard County were like 1779, 1780, and 81. And it was almost like after that trouble passed, then people were a little more comfortable moving away from the fort.
Yeah.
For the sake of this, from the county seat of Garrard County is Lancaster, from Lancaster to Fort Logan, 10 miles.
Yeah.
And the road is basically today is a straight line almost. So, even when these people moved into Garrard County, they really weren't that far from safety, I guess would be the right word.
Yeah. Protection
some protection. So.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you're looking at Boonesboro in Madison County, Fort Logan, and Lincoln, and you would also even have Whitley in the southern part or southeastern part of Lincoln County. A pretty good little triangle when you look at Garrard County as well, and then you have Lexington up north on the north part. It makes sense that these places that were kind of more populated. If it's a very rational decision to say, hey, why don't we move? If we're going to move somewhere, let's move to this place that's in the middle of all these other places.
Yeah. You're almost moving into the circle. It's almost like when elephants surround their young, it's almost like you're moving inside of the elephants. You know? And to me, what's interesting about Garrard County, when you think about like the geography of it, is when it was created, really the borders have never changed.
Yeah.
There was a tiny the very southern end of Garrard County. They got a little bit from Madison County in 1800 and just a little bit from Lincoln County in 1801. But if I'm doing a percentage, I'm saying that's about 10%, maybe at most, of what Garrard County is.
Yeah.
In a time when you saw counties created,
they were massive.
They were pretty big, and we're still getting sheared down even into like the 1800s, early 1800s, 1820s. Garrard County was it's kind of sort of always been sort of what it is. So.
Which that would make sense, with it being in the middle. I mean, these other counties that already have these borders kind of set up. And what rivers?
Pretty important.
Kentucky River.
I'm sorry.
The Kentucky River borders it to the north, right?
Sure. Yeah. So you have the Kentucky River that goes across the northern border. So that's the boundary between Garrard and Jessamine County today. To the west is Dix River, which now Tarrington Lake is because it was dammed back in the 60s or 50s, I think. But that goes into what is now Boyle County and then Mercer County. At the time, it was all Mercer. And then to the east is Paint Lick Creek, which takes you into Madison County. The only place that Garrard County does not have water surrounding it is between it and Lincoln County. Yeah. But the proximity to Stanford kind of makes that sort of, I guess, okay.
Well, there wasn't really any need to come in any farther into Lincoln County with like you said, with Stanford being so approximately, so far away. And it is kind of a unique county that it was, once it was made, that was it. It didn't really change much at all. As opposed to say Lincoln. Lincoln, of course, was getting smaller every year or two. And then, I mean, Rockcastle didn't change much either, but it was made a little later down the line. It makes sense. Well, and with it being bordered by rivers and so forth as well. But
well, I think then we'll go a little bit further into something here. The Native American presence, and I think everybody sort of has this image of Kentucky as Native Americans fighting settlers, and it had happened, obviously. There were no, we've talked about this before on the show, but there really weren't any tribes. There weren't very many tribes that lived permanently in Kentucky. And by the time that Garrard County was established, that same circle that we talked about had sort of moved tribes away. So there wasn't a whole lot of Native American tribal issues. Now, I've read and I know people that hunt arrowheads and all that, and they're like, man, there's arrowheads everywhere. It's like, well, yeah, because there would have been Native Americans here for thousands of years. So, I mean, those didn't necessarily mean that they were shot at, somebody who was establishing a station, in 1780. So, but there were a handful of stations, and, I think we've talked about this before, but, how would you best describe a station?
A station, I mean, I guess to compare it to make the best connection, a small fort. That's kind of what I would say. It's some sort of fortification that it's more than just a house, or more than just a country.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. And you see a lot of stations that emerged, probably more stations than forts when it was all said and done.
Yeah.
A station was not quite a fort. It was a little more than a house.
Yeah.
They talk about there was no fort at William Whitley's place in Crab Orchard.
No.
But it's referenced as Whitley's Station because people knew if you got to there, you could stay there in the house, and you would be as safe as you probably could be.
Yeah.
So there was a handful of those, and I'll do my best to kind of describe where they are. They were all started in about a 1 or 2 year period. I do not know for sure if any of these people went from one station to the other, or if they all came from, say, Fort Logan.
Yeah.
But it was all. I mean, it was the idea was prominent for all of them. The first one is in what's now called Bryantsville. It's in northern Garrard County, not all the way to the river, but it's in northern Garrard County. That was started by a man named James Smith. That's usually the one that's given credit for being the earliest. But like I said, they all happen so fast.
Yeah.
Bryantsville becomes a little bit of a town. It's never been much, but it still has a post office today. The next one was two brothers, James and John Downing. They had a station on Sugar Creek. Sugar Creek is north of Garrard County, north of Lancaster. So if you drive north out of Lancaster, then you got to kind of veer to the east, and Sugar Creek runs through there. There's a spot where Sugar Creek is met by another creek.
Yeah.
And that is where there was a mill there. That was where Downing's station was.
Yeah.
It would have been a good location because you had water.
Yeah.
It was not a real good location it was not super accessible. And even to like that area never really grew.
Good. Yeah.
There was something called Canebrake Station, started by a man named Humphrey Best, which was on Paint Lick Creek. That was, I don't really know I don't know how close that is to the town of Paint Lick. But the town of Paint Lick is sort of where Paint Lick Creek, there's two bits of water that come together. There's Paint Lick and White Lick that are right there. That was the same year. Gilbert's Creek, which is on the Garrard-Lincoln line, started in 1780. My parents actually lived on Gilbert's Creek, really close to Gilbert's Creek for a while. That area, that would have been the closest settlement in Garrard County to Fort Logan. And then finally, Paint Lick Station, which is the actual Paint Lick town, starts then in 1781.
Yeah.
Sometimes you see it referred to as Paint Lick Fort. I mean, I guess they had a wall around the town, but really, it by definition, a station. One other one, in the very, very northern tip of Garrard County, where it touches now Jessamine County. If you're in that northern area of Garrard County, you can look across the Kentucky River and you'll see the Hickman Creek. The Hickman Creek flows in right there to the Kentucky River. On the Garrard County side, there was a station that was a man named William Grant had started that. So, point of all of this is not necessarily for anyone to be able to spot them all.
Yeah.
But if I'm plotting these on a map, we talked about how that Garrard County was sort of in a circle. These almost make a circle inside of that circle.
They're all spokes
to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west.
Well, and I'll talk about Paint Lick a little bit now. Paint Lick, there is still a little town. Is there, or is there? But now the road doesn't go through it anymore, right?
No, they 3 or 4 years ago they completed the current Highway 52, which connects Lancaster to Richmond, and so you no longer drive through the town of Paint Lick. The town of Paint Lick, it was about 6 buildings, 6 or 7 buildings. It was right on the river. It's flooded a few times. There's another podcast that you and I can do
about Paint Lake.
About Paint Lake when the train crashed and the circus animals got out. That's a whole different story. But there is still a town of Paint Lake. Mm-hmm. In fact, in Garrard County, there's only two. There's only one city.
Yeah, it's like incorporated town or
incorporated town. Yeah. Paint Lake has never been, to my knowledge, incorporated. Mm-hmm. They do have a post office.
Yeah.
Bryantsville has a post office. There were a couple other places that did have post offices mm-hmm. in the past, but they don't now. But Paint Lake is a little village, but it sort of describes a whole area. Mm-hmm. And so if you talk to people from Garrard County, they will say, well, we live in the Paint Lake area. And that can stretch anywhere from 2 miles. That almost is like, it's almost as soon as you get to today, I would say Hyattsville Baptist Church. Now, anything beyond that is Paint
almost
Lake.
The east side.
The eastern edge, Mm-hmm. So it has always been the least populated area of Garrard County. It still is. My son goes to Paint Lake Elementary, mm-hmm. and we have 3 elementaries, and it's like half the size of the other 2. So even today, it's a really small area. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, though.
Well, I was going to say we can get into the naming of Paint Lake and so forth on another episode.
Sure. So as I was saying, these locations, though, all sort of laid along roads that connected much bigger forts. Mm-hmm. If you think about a north-south bisect, you had Fort Logan, Stanford in the south. That eventually, it could take you straight north mm-hmm. To Bryan Station, which is now Lexington. Mm-hmm. Nicholasville didn't get started as early as the others. And then if you think about it on an east-west trip, you have Fort Boonesboro, Richmond, that kind of eventually emerged from it, and then Fort Harrod and Danville to the east. So you're connecting on all fronts. Now, what was not ever a station was Lancaster. What is now the city of Lancaster was really nothing more than a few log cabins. But where the roads crossed, they came in kind of handy because people could trade and something there along the way. You could mm-hmm. relieve your horses, I guess, or you could leave information for somebody else. That was known as Wallace's Crossroads.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to say this. There's people that are Garrard County historians that are smarter than me. I've lived here my whole life, and I've mm-hmm. probably heard Wallace's Crossroads 3 times ever. Uh-huh. And I was the vice president of the Garrard County Historical Society for like 5 years. So I'll say that was a very, very loose descriptor of the area. The area, that land had been awarded to Adam Wallace. You and I have talked about in the past about Revolutionary War land mm-hmm. grants.
Yeah.
It was awarded to his family. And eventually, the Wallace family, from what I can tell, it looks like they moved further. We mentioned Logan County. It looks like they find their way into Logan County. Now, I don't know if that's current Logan County or one of the areas.
Whatever it could have been. Yeah.
I have never known any Wallaces in Garrard County. There is a little itty bitty little wide spot in the road on the Garrard-Madison County line. Mm-hmm. It's called Wallace Town or Wallace Ton. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming the same people probably are connected to that, but Wallace is not a name that really stuck in Garrard County.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the formation of Lancaster, or that there wasn't really a Lancaster station or anything like that, but it makes perfect sense, though, that the center of the county would then become, when you talk about these, place on the east, you got these station on the west, you have all these stations around that, in the middle would be the place to go to, commerce and so forth.
Right.
And if you're traveling back and forth, that becomes then the main hub of I don't know what you would call it, commerce, I guess.
Yeah, well, and it becomes one of those places that sort of accidentally becomes a location. Mm-hmm. It wasn't necessarily designed that way, mm-hmm. but it turns out that way. So let me take you just a little bit further then. The land that's now town, that eventually goes into the hands of a man named John Buford, mm-hmm. before it then lands in with his nephew, William Buford. There's a little bit of conflicting reports here. Sometimes people could claim land for other people. It almost seems like William Buford, I don't know if Buford couldn't come to Lancaster or come to his location yet, and John Buford was sort of like owning it for him. That's not the right way to describe it, but you know what I mean.
Holding it.
Do what?
Holding it,
yeah. So it lands with William Buford. Now, just a real quick thing on Buford. He was a captain with the 11th Virginia Regiment during the Revolutionary War. The information that I have him in the Revolutionary War from November 1778 to April 1779. Now, that's only 6 months. Yeah. Truthfully, I'm sure he was probably in longer than that. But that's when those are the muster rolls that I've actually seen.
Yeah.
So most of those guys served at least a year. That you were kind of required to serve that, and the fact that he was in the Virginia 11th Regiment, that's a little bit stronger than I fought in the war, because those guys might have drifted in and out. So I don't know exactly what his war dates were, but nonetheless, he ends up living in current day, what we would say today is Lancaster.
Yeah.
The state senator Tom Buford, who represents Garrard County and Jessamine County, is a direct descendant from this William Buford. And whenever Tom Buford makes appearances in Garrard County, even though he's never lived here, he always sort of makes a point. I know he's a politician, I understand that, but he does have a connection that goes back really as far as anybody. So Buford donates 57 acres in what is today Lancaster for the development of the city of Lancaster. And so this is the city then gets laid out by a man named Henry Paulding, who was from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That's who the city of Lancaster was named after. I don't know a ton about Paulding, other than he was connected to a man named Judge Caleb Wallace, who was a prominent figure up around Midway. I think Caleb Wallace was in some connection to Adam Wallace in Lancaster. These are all sort of tied in. From what I can gather with Paulding, he was a Revolutionary War soldier, obviously. I'm sure these guys fought, at least had some interconnection, and then ended up sort of getting land grants in roughly the same area. So Paulding, the city of Lancaster, what we today would call the city of Lancaster, was founded in 1801. So to give you an idea, what's the main city today, it was about 20 years after the actual, the earliest settlements in the county. Again, it was a beneficiary of being in the right place where two roads cross. Originally called Lancaster Courthouse. You'll see that a lot in places. It was places with the court. That's what it was
referred to as Lancaster Courthouse instead of just.
So the courthouse then, though, was dropped as a name in 1811.
Seems reasonable.
So that's kind of where it is. So Lancaster is, if I can get really technical with you on this right now. If you see Caster, Caster, at the end of a name, that comes from the old Latin word castrum, Castrum, which in a very, very loose definition describes sort of a square fort. So if you see something that's named Caster, in its earliest iteration, it was probably some kind of square fort. Now, Lancaster, Kentucky was never a square fort, but it was laid out like Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which had been a square fort. And if you come to Lancaster today, just like we've talked about circles inside of circles, in Lancaster, the main, where the two roads cross, forms a square. And then the city was then laid with another square on the outside of it.
Wow.
If you go through town, the roads that are through town are named after the roads that it'll take you to. Lexington Road, Richmond Road, Stanford Road, and Danville Road.
Yeah.
On the outer edge, though, there are 4 roads that go in a square around the outer edge. One of them is Paulding Street, named after the man that laid it out. One of them, Buford Street, named after the man who gave the town, sort of gave the land to make the town. And then there's also Campbell Street. And I don't really know who the Campbell was other than just an early person who lived there. And then the last one, today it's called Maple Avenue. At the time it was called Water Street because it went to a collect pond. And that's so it was the 4th Street was Water Street. So.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty interesting because I mean Lancaster really was planned out very much.
Yeah, it's very, very strategic, and you don't really think about it so much today because houses and paved roads, and you don't notice as much on a car. But Lancaster, it sits on a hill, and when you come to next time you come to Lancaster, no matter which direction you come from, you're going uphill to get to the top.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. And I mean, growing up in back before 150 was paved, we always went the old 150, of course, but always going through Lancaster, you always knew, hey, we're about halfway, but the crossroads there were so like it was symbolic. Oh, this is the place.
Right
now. So where the roads are now is where the roads were then. I mean, is that exactly what?
Yeah, they're pretty much now. Obviously, they go in pretty much straight lines out of the town in all 4 directions. But that's really because, like I said, it sits on a hill.
Yeah.
The only thing that's different, obviously, there's been some lane changes and that kind of stuff, straightening of roads, but really. The roads are pretty much laid exactly as they had been, a mile or so out of town. Now they do change a little bit once you get out in the country, but they follow sort of a similar pattern. So
yeah, well, that's pretty cool. I mean, that it was that. You go to some cities and I guess you can tell that they're not planned out at all.
Right. Well, I think that's where the date is important. This was 1801, and you think that there's not that much of a difference between 1776 and 1801. There's 25 years.
Yeah.
But that tells you a couple of things. One, there's more people, but 2, there's enough safety to warrant actually making a true design instein of like I'm just going to build right next to you.
Yeah, planning, sit down, hey, we need to do this instead of I need to get my hands as quick as I can.
The original forts would have been built basically as close to I'm going to build my house as close to the fort as I can, and we'll just kind of grow out wherever. But Lancaster was enough to be established and to have sort of a game for it. Now, I mentioned Paulding. I went to Lancaster Elementary School, and the street, it sits on Lexington Street, but there's the back street that takes you into the school, and it's called Paulding Street. And until I was sort of researching this, I had never known why it was called Paulding Street. Oh. And I've never known anyone with that name in Garrard County. So I don't know if Henry Paulding moved on to another location to design another town or not. But he was successful here. So
there you go. Yeah, that's pretty cool. One question I was going to ask you. You talk about Buford. He was the guy who gave, you said, 57 acres? And
yes.
So he had a Revolutionary War grant, correct? Or was that... My point is, how much did he get, or in general?
Yeah, I really don't know the answer to that question because, like I said, his uncle John seems to be holding it.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't know if John got the land and then he partitioned some of it off to William.
Yeah.
Or if I really don't know the answer to that question. So
what's generating in my head is like how much land one person might have got as opposed to somebody else as far as land grants? Is there, I mean, do you know, was it all just a standard rate, or did it depend on your rank? Because my other thing is, I know Garrard, James Garrard, whenever he came to Bourbon County, he surveyed like 40,000 acres. And that's how that's which I mean is a massive amount. When you think about how much you compared to 57 acres or so forth.
So this is the Kentucky Secretary of State website.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is, as you can see here, this is what Virginia gave,
mm-hmm.
which is why when Paulding, like, he was from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but he may have been serving out of Virginia. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you can see here, like, I mean, even somebody who really didn't do much time at all, you could still get 100 acres.
Yeah. So,
and obviously then, so if you're seeing somebody that got 15,000 acres, you know, that's a lot. Yeah. I would imagine most regular folks are getting 200 to 400 acres.
Yeah. And just to, so we can, I guess, say this, a sailor, a soldier was getting 100 acres, a non-commissioned officer, 200 acres, a sailor or soldier who served throughout the war. Oh, the first two were just for a limited 3 years.
Yeah, for brief enlistments. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sailor or soldier who served throughout the war was 400 acres. Non-commissioned was 400 acres. But then once you get to these next few, it really jumps up to, was that
the cornet or ensign or lieutenant? Yeah. The subaltern.
Cornet. Yeah. You're getting up to 2,000, 4,000. And lieutenant, a mate,
right?
A mate, a surgeon, and then major general, 15,000 to 17,500. So, bringing up Garrard, James Garrard, when I read it, he may have just surveyed 40,000 acres,
right?
But still, he probably got a lot of acreage anyway. Sure. And that was the whole reason he moved. That was one of the reasons he moved to Kentucky, is because of financial struggles after, during and after the war.
And that's something that it sort of was. It probably wasn't on purpose,
mm-hmm.
but it kind of worked out good for a lot of people involved. Was the military? The government just did not have the funds to be able to pay. And a lot of people really financially were big losers in this.
Mm-hmm.
They were expecting, a little bit of money, and they didn't get it. They went back to their farms, whatever they had, and they hadn't really been able to work them, and so
mm-hmm.
those were in many times in disarray. So moving to Kentucky or Tennessee or Ohio or wherever they moved to was kind of, in some cases, almost the best case scenario. And for the government, it worked out good too, because they put people out on the frontier to handle issues, and that allowed, that kind of opened the door for more people to to move. So I don't know that was necessarily the plan when the war started, but it worked out really good a lot of cases for when it ended.
Yeah, it was definitely a win-win for the government side. Everybody else, depending on how it ended for you, would be possibly a win-lose.
Right. So when we think about Garrard County, then Jameson, we're 225 years into
hold
the
on.
county.
Real quickly though, on the sign, isn't the sign to Lancaster? Doesn't it say 1797?
Yes.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of controversy about that. That was when Garrard County.
Yeah.
And so that the city bought the signs.
Yeah.
But the county wanted. There were people that said, if people drive through here and see 1801, not as old as some of our neighbors, and we wanted to. People wanted it to be known like Garrard County was. We were here. We were older than this town or that town. So that's a. That's a little. That's an issue. So.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
So 225 years later, in many cases, Garrard County is still really the same place that it was. I think a lot of that, as we've talked about, goes to, sort of the foresight to lay out a town that was designed, that was designed around the way it was. The unfortunate thing, and there's a few different reasons why, is that the county never really grew like the others did, like its neighbors did, and roads were part of that. Colleges were part of that. There's an interesting story about Center College wanted to relocate to Lancaster, but they wanted the government to give them like 10 acres or something like that. And the government said, no, we're not going to do that. Yeah. And so Danville got that. What happens in your county, if you have a fairly significant college established in it, who knows? Yeah. But it's an interesting place. A lot of those little stations sort of petered out. There's really not a lot of remnants. Bryanttsville still remains as a pretty much wide spot in the road. Paint Lick, remains as something a little bit more than that. And then Lancaster is the city that's here. But that gives you a little bit of an idea of sort of where Garrard County came from, and so some of the background information behind it.
Yeah, well, I must say I've enjoyed learning some more about one of my northern neighbors, or I guess you could say southeastern neighbors, I guess, as far as Lincoln County goes, northern to Rockcastle. But
that's northern to Lincoln too. So.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, and it's one of those good things. I enjoy finding those connections, especially looking at the counties. I grew up in Rockcastle. I've lived in Lincoln for about 5 years now, and I've been to Garrard County many a times. My daughter does dance in Garrard County, so it's always interesting when you find out those little connections, especially about the roads and I like history quite a bit. So I mean, I'll be able to point out to Maxim and Eliana whenever we drive through. Did you know this? I guess I could rank it maybe in the top 10 now. Maybe.
We'll count it.
Top three, maybe. Maybe if Center College would have came, I would rank it higher, I guess.
Me too.
Well, and I will apologize for Rockcastle beating Garrard County Sports so much.
We're fine.
Well, that'll wrap us up for our first part of Garrard County. We'll talk more about Garrard County in another episode. And two, you mentioned earlier about one of the Lincoln County episodes, and we talked more. There's more to these counties as we go. So we will always definitely, when something comes up, we can go back and rehash a county and talk about it when things come up. So that happens from time to time. But that'll be all for this time. You can connect to us again at KY History Pod on Facebook or Twitter. Email us at thelandbetweenthemeadows@gmail.com. And you can find us on Patreon if you want to check out our Patreon page and feel a need in that. We do want to give a quick shout out to our Patreon, Zippy Duck. And if you find something interesting, be more than willing to go check it out if you want, if you're interested. Daniel, where can they find you?
At DHopkins_9.
All right, and I guess that's it. You got anything else, Mr. Hopkins?
I think we're good.
All right, we'll see you all, or thanks for listening, and we will see you all next time.